The peace of Christ be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Gospel according to Mark.
Glory to you, O God.
James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to Jesus and said to him, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you." He replied, "What do you wish me to do for you?" They answered him, "Grant that in your glory we may sit one at your right and the other at your left." Jesus said to them, "You do not know what you are asking. Can you drink the cup that I drink, or be baptized with the baptism with which I have been baptized?" They said to him, "We can." Jesus said to them, "The cup that I drink, you will drink, and the baptism with which I am baptized, you will be baptized in. But to sit at my right or at my left is not mine to give, but for those to whom it has been prepared." When the 10 heard this, they became indignant with James and John. Jesus summoned them and said to them, "You know that those who are recognized as rulers over the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones make their authority over them felt. But it shall not be so among you. Rather, whoever wishes to be great among you will be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you will be a slave of all. For the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life for the ransom of many." A reading from the Gospel according to Mark.
Praise to
Glory to you, O Lord.
All right. So many moons ago, in the town of Louisville, Kentucky, I was a first-person interpreter for a historical home. One of the first tidbits I picked up was the requirement that those serving food from the kitchen outside into the dining room inside the house, an entry-level job among us interpreters, had to whistle while they walked from the kitchen to the house. Now, for those of us raised with a certain set of dwarfs and a lovely princess, this may bring up images of joyful, happy work. This was not the end goal, though. No, it was actually a matter of trust, or rather distrust, as the servants were required to whistle to prove that they weren't eating food as they went from the kitchen to the house, because of course the food was not meant for them. So while they went about their work, they were constantly reminded that they were not trusted, that they were vulnerable at the whim of others. Servanthood was not something to be coveted. This was not the seat of glory that James and John may have been looking for. For the Jewish disciples of Jesus' time, the story from Isaiah would have been very familiar. It comes from what many scholars call the second part of Isaiah, in that it is from the chapters of Isaiah which seem to have been written during the exile. The Jewish people have been driven out of their homelands, and their connection to the Holy Land, given to them by God, has been broken. They are vulnerable and at the whim of a foreign people. Into this story, there comes a desire to be reconciled to God and to homeland. For someone, the suffering servant, to do something to reconcile the people with their God. It's not hard to see how the Jews, gathering after Jesus' death and resurrection, would make a connection between Jesus and the suffering servant from Isaiah. To take on the position of a servant, to place yourself at the bottom of the ladder, in service to others, at their beck and call. Not a position anyone really covets. And yet, we're told this is the position to seek. This is the call to covet. To see your life as a chance to ransom or do something, which is the actual Greek translation of the word ransom, not payment. To do something for many. We too can become the suffering servant. And what does a suffering servant have to do with today's gospel reading? The bit just before our gospel reading today is the third time in Mark that Jesus tells his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer and die. And yet, they still aren't getting it. Earlier this week, someone was grumbling about another reading where someone was trying to jockey for position. Maybe it's a message that the disciples, and by extension us, have a hard time hearing. It's not really a fun one to hear. Sadly, based on the reaction in Jerusalem, the third time doesn't seem to have been the charm. Based on the problems with power seeking we see in the church and in our country, maybe we could have used a few more examples. Maybe the gospel writers included all of these examples of screw-ups because they knew that even with the benefit of hindsight, we were going to screw up more often than we got it right. Lord, let your mercy be upon us as we place our trust in you. Poor James and John. Right after Jesus talks about the fate that awaits him, they're caught wishing for a seat at the head table, the brass ring, the corner office, the accolades, those coveted spots at Jesus' right and left, which ended up going to a couple of thieves. Could they have missed the message any more completely? Maybe they weren't paying attention when Peter was rebuked and when Jesus said, anyone who wants to be first must be the very last. But before we give James and John the stink eye for wanting the good seats, let's stop for a moment and ask instead, what were the other 10 grumbling about? Of course, how like them, maybe they grumbled. It's not fair that James and John are asking for those seats. Surely I am as deserving as they are. They're always jockeying for the best seats. Clearly, I'm more humble than they are. Uh-oh, there's a slippery slope right over an edge. Are any of the disciples, and let's be honest, any of us, looking to be one in a circle of equals? Or are we all hoping that some of us will be more equal than others? And even a circle of equals leaves the possibility that someone gets left outside of the circle. Are we truly willing to give up our spot, to take the lowest seat at the table, to go to the outer edge, to do all the work and expect not a morsel of trust and acceptance from those who do lord it over us? How do we balance the call to be servant while not becoming a doormat willing to whistle while we work to prove we're doing nothing wrong? Today's call in the Psalms in Hebrews to show our trust in God, to confidently approach God, may be the answer. Where is this line between confidently approaching God, trusting in his mercy, and expecting a better seat at the table? Maybe the message is twofold. Not only that we must be willing to take the lowest seat, but we must also remember what it's like to have the lowest seat if we happen to have one a little better. Time and time again, Jesus sets a child, a servant, a prisoner, a sinner, before us and says, be like them. Identify with their vulnerability. Hand over your privileges and follow in my footsteps of love. It is then that we will come into glory with Jesus. Amen.